Thank you, everybody. Wow, that was good.
I had no idea. I was expecting more Agincourt and such. But thanks for coming for the third session, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And this, of course, is a down session because of war. But we'll get happier things coming up, like the origins of Parliament, which I find very exciting, and happier thoughts of the future. But right now, of course, in terms of characterizing the late Middle Ages, we are thinking about wars. Not that that's surprising, but it's more or less the idea that military technology being such, wars could be carried out in more, shall we say, terrible ways and last longer. We're talking specifically about the conflict between England and France, and they have a very interesting history. A friend of mine was just letting me know that they were celebrating the 120th anniversary. And many of you will know this from your studies of 20th century diplomacy before World War I. Not that I would suggest you go out to the concourse and ask the students whom you say, what occurred? And they would go, I know. It was the Anglo-French Entente prior to World War I. But if you could use that, I'm glad to pass that on to you. That's exciting. Believe it or not, they actually had a ceremony because it was April of 1904. And so I'm thinking, yeah, but I'm not sure they really love each other. You know, sometimes we go through all this and give me a big hug and, oh, you're mon ami and all that. Their relationship is a strange one, and it has been, I think it's fair to say, tempestuous. In any event, we'll talk about this 100 Years' War, so-called. Many of us will be aware, and I'm sure you are, that it wasn't really 100 years. And historians being what they are, in the 19th century, they decided to make the wars, endless wars between England and France, you know, a nice, neat package, and then wrap it up. And they gave it the title 100 Years' War. That's the truth. About 1860. I'm not lying to you. Until then, you know, if you would ask somebody in 1850 and they would have just thought essentially same old, same old. And then they said, no, let's make it a big package. So that's just a little tip in the way history develops. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? That actually it was just a series of wars. Because, of course, let's face it, and again, when I say 1066, many of you all, yeah, exactly. Many of you scholars just say, oh, I know. Because, of course, everybody knows about that Duke of Normandy. And you think, well, what's that got to do with this? Everything. Because once the Duke of Normandy takes England and becomes King of England and brings in all those Normans, it will never be the same. Normandy and England, as many of you know, have a relationship, a long-standing relationship. And in many ways, this relationship lasts through all of these centuries And in fact, if you want to go on with it, and we do, when we think about the port of Calais, the last possession of the English that they held until 1558, which long after this, that's right, Queen Mary was when she lost it, in case you want some trivia. That will get it very impressive to your friends. Yeah, it was Bloody Mary that she lost it because, of course, she loved a Spaniard. Yeah, that'll do it. But all of this, Normandy and England, that connection. I don't know why, but that's just not a flattering picture of the first valve. You know what? I don't know. I would have asked for a refund if I'd been there at the Valois court. In any event, as we move on and we talk about Philip VI, and there are many distinguished members of the Valois family, so they had a rough start here with the first two. But in the case of Philip VI, he was not really supposed to be king. It was one of those very odd situations. And it had to do, of course, with the fact he was a male and the other claimant obtained his claims through a female. And we'll talk about him because all of this has to do with Philip IV. Many of you will remember Philip the Fair, Philip le Bel. We talked about him with his differences with the Holy See, Pope Boniface VIII, some of you recall, and because of their differences and because of the end of the Templars, there was claimed that the curse had been put on the Capetian family, and the Pope died, and the king died in the same year, 1314. In any event, we're about to see how all this comes out, but Philip IV had a nephew. Let's look at how this was. Oh, I love this. It's like Arbor Day. Yeah, we got our tree and it's a beauty.
That's a biggie.
I know. And look at it. I mean, you could just go over this. And I cut it, cut some limbs off. So to bring this tree under control, because I mean, I know. You'd say you shouldn't have done it, but you'll thank me later. Believe me. All right, look red, go red. Look up there, see Philip IV. And then we're aware of his sons. You see Louis X, Philip V, Charles IV, and even John I, who really was just a baby. So I don't know why they even gave him a number, but they did. So, and he's not to be confused with
That
John, yeah, because this John's simply is so you can fool people at trivia or something, because you never give the English one a number, right? So all of this then is to say Charles IV, and we go on from there to appreciate the fact that Philip IV had a brother, Charles of Valois. Yeah. So you say, but look at that. And then you say, what's not red? Philip IV's daughter, Oh, gee, why can't she be read too? Well, because she becomes the Queen of England. So, and that's an advertisement for next year in English history about the story of that relationship. Yeah. This would take Dr. Phil or Oprah Winfrey to figure this one out. Problems, okay? Problems in the relationship. In any event, Isabel, as we will see, had a son, but the French, of course, were not very interested, given the fact that king would have been half English. So they said, since the claim of, as he would become Edward III, comes through a female, we can't count that. So we'll do the next best thing, going through the younger brother of Philip IV. And that will be Charles of Valois. And he must have been, if he didn't alive, he would have been really excited. My kid got it, and I thought we would always be number 2, and now so that's how he got it. That's how the Valois family comes in. And he becomes Philip VI, and Isabella, the wife of, the Queen of England, will take her son to do fealty and homage for the lands that he has. And I don't know how he felt about that. I'm better than he is, Mama. Why do I have to do this? It's that sort of thing, but that's the way it works. But it's always to be remembered. We'll come back to the tree. We can stop now because we got what I wanted you to see there in terms of families are very, very tied together. And again, marital relationships are based, of course, not on dating or any of that, but on whatever will work from a perspective of political success. On the other hand, Isabel and Edward II had special issues, I'm sure many of you will know. Now, this is the legal relationship I'm talking about. Now we've got our map. By the time we are talking, that is the start of 100 Years' War, Normandy was just a dream. Normandy had been taken by the French back under Philip II. Not that the English admitted it. I mean, it's like you can take it away from us, but it is it's ours and it'll all be ours. So you can take it. But could you imagine? If you'd had land there, you'd been living in England, perhaps. John got them into this mess, King John. In any event, finally, in 1259, the English, because they couldn't afford to do anything else, had to admit they'd lost all that land. And you see that in Rose down south. And that's beautiful land in case you're looking for somewhere to go on a trip. I'm just saying, God, always ready for a trip to Bordeaux anytime. I was pushing Avignon last week. But I'm pushing Bordeaux. And if you like adult beverages,
All this stuff.
yeah, it's good stuff. It's a different than Chateauneuf du Pape over east, but right there, and you're real close. I mean, not walking distance. If you want to go to Spain, I would want to have a car or a train or something, but it's not far. So it's a long way from Paris. That's what was left. You said, what happened to that beautiful empire? I'll tell you what happened. A nip here and a tuck there. And who had done this? Oh, the people we have an entente. We love them so much. Yeah, right. Again, can you believe that all of those lands you see the colored, when you say all that used to be ours if you're English? Yeah, but the French are taking it. Again, is this nationalism? I think it's royal family versus royal family. I'm not sure that everybody in Bordeaux or wherever it may be is flying, sing Marseillaise. I think that would be way, way in the future. I think this is a matter of who will be less bother to us. Is London closer or is it Paris? So all of this means they lost they acknowledged it in the mid 13th century, the English, grudgingly. I don't mean they smiled, but they went through the formalities. And now the King of England is proclaimed as the Duke of Aquitaine, but he doesn't really have all that. Basically, he has what you see, which is called Gascony. And he will do fealty and homage with gritted teeth, I dare. You know, you don't want to get on your knees before another king. As your brother-in-law, St. Louis. And you should say, well, I would love, if I had a brother-in-law who was a saint, I'm sure many of us do not, but let's say we did, you'd be happy to do an act like that. Oh, you saint, I can't wait just to abase myself before you, oh great one. But not many of us are like that, and certainly Henry thought, I'm sure he was better than that. So in any event, he now holds that as a thief. And of course, you know, he does that, but he thinks this is just the beginning. I'm sure that they had no interest in saying, you know, this is all, we're happy. I mean, he needed money. The English, they had debts. Yeah. And if they could get back all of these valuable lands, they were going to do so. So, other factors that we might note in addition to getting back the French lands and the French tried to take everything, because it's not like the French really intended to let those things merely exist, but they intended to get it all. Just took more time than they realized, you know, in terms of going down south. The Flemish factor was very important because that was a major economic area. And in the early 14th century, the French had tried to conquer Flanders and had failed to do so. And the English, of course, were sitting back and saying, go big F. We love, you know, they were loving Flanders. And you may have been up in that particular area because the Flemish had this wonderful trade relationship with the English based on what else but English sheep, the wool trade. And we never forget Braveheart, do we? So the English cannot leave those Scottish folks alone. I mean, I love Plaid, but I mean, there's a limit. A nice trip up there is great, but just let Bonnie Prince Charlie alone. But the idea is during the time of the Edwards in the 13th century, Edward Longshanks, as they say in the movie, All of this means those interests continued, and finally, the Scots, I guess, in desperation, had a special relationship, shall we call it, with the French, based on their mutual dislike of the English. So, all of this is significant because they want to support the Scots and the Scots want to harass the English. So we understand that, and I'm sure that goes on for centuries. And then a factor that's mentioned for those of you reading the book along with this, the idea of chivalry. And this is an illustration of the Order of the Garter. And the idea that actually this came about during the reign of Edward III, the idea of, I almost call it retro, isn't that what they call it nowadays? You know, it's like they're doing all the chivalry and they're doing all, it doesn't necessarily correspond to current reality, but they love all of that, the men being together. And they have too much of something that I beg you to be careful with. Mead, it's called. You have a little mead and you think you're fine. Then you say, well, maybe just freshen up my glass. I'm telling you, it can be ugly. Yes, the results. Memory lapses. What can I say? Oh. I was chaperoning, so I'm just what I observed. I'm not claiming. Anyway, the idea is these people would get together and knock it back. Yeah. And then they would say, let's go on a crusade, man. Yeah. And then they would start hugging and all that. You say, oh no. Yes. I'm sure you've never known men like that, but yeah, that this actually happened. And I'm sure that was happening with the French and the English. But the idea is, what's that got to do with conquering France? Well, maybe next year we'll go to the Mideast. Maybe this year we'll go to France and kick some, you know what. So, this is not what the church had in mind. While the church had said it's good for the, well, I guess you call them upper class non-churchmen, it's good for you to go out and fight because you're fighting for the Lord. But of course, they're going to fight each other. But the idea of chivalry, this retro chivalry and all of that, they say affected both Edward III and Philip VI. So that is one, shall we say, hypothesis. I'm sure it's a sort of extra. If you want to, go to a rally, a pep rally, and get people get fired up, that kind of thing. We've all been to those events. I mean, I think they're already pretty excited, drunk or sober, right? I mean, but it's even better who you want to fight, who you want to hurt. Yeah, French, that kind of thing. Very interesting. So it takes a while, a lot of diplomatic activity, one side or the other. So it will go on, let's see, from the late 20s to the early 30s. It's like those years of deciding, should we do it? And finally, 1337, it's like that's when Edward will renounce his fealty to the French king. And he would say, in effect, and I guess you have people at your court who are helping you with all of these kinds of decisions. Because you say, well, really, it really wasn't what it appeared to be. It's like, back then they didn't have cameras and things where they could photograph you doing your fealty and homage. Yeah, well, I liked you very much back then, but you're just my cousin and you're really just a Valois. So, you're okay, but I'm really the king and you're not. And frankly, you're a loser, pseudo king. And those are fighting words. You see, this is scary. You show the fist and that's the idea that Philip VI, who was becoming king when he was in his mid-30s, and he had a lot of experience as a warrior and so forth. And now he's dealing with a much younger Edward and sort of thinking, well, I don't have to take this from that little punk. And you French lords, are you with me? And they're going, we. I don't think they're excited. It's like they want to be, but probably the English are a bit more excited. In any event, the neighbors of the French in some of those states of the Holy Roman Empire, remember it, it's still around. Some of those states don't like the French. And the English is saying, maybe you would like to move into some of it. And, that kind of thing. So we're told that a lot of this went on diplomatically to give Edward, shall we say, greater strength. So here we go. As many of you interested in military history will be aware, this was not the first great conflict, because Sluis, the naval battle, is sometimes cited. But this particular battle of Crécy, with the longbow and all the rest of it, will bring about a first great victory. You notice the year and you think, boy, that's a long time. I wonder how public opinion was. I don't think they worried too much about public opinion, because who is the public? That's a good question. I think if you're fighting a war, you're talking about the nobility and their minions. And if you're like most of us back then, you know what you are? Peasants. And that means you're working in the fields. Or you may be working with the sheep. I don't know. You're a shepherd or shepherd's assistant. And guess what you do? Do you have an opinion on the war? No, I don't think it has a lot to do with you. You just there to work, okay? And you say, well, yeah, but I'm helping. I'm doing this for my land. I don't think so. I think you're doing it just to stay alive. But the idea is basically that this was the first battle. And like so many in the future, they will always talk about the English would win the battle and the French would win the war. But that's a long way from now. That's an illustration, by the way, from a famous contemporary source about the 100 Years' War. In any event, very embarrassing for Edward VI. Isn't it odd when we think of fighting going on despite the plague? But they do take ironically, I guess, a breather. Because after this particular time and if you will look at the map, you'll see up there. I think it's always amazing. I guess if you're truly a 100 Years War fan, you could go all the way up that coast and see all these sites. Because can everyone see the Calais? And then you see, in fact, Crécy right there, right south of it. And you think they usually catch them, right there when they're coming in from the coast. And then they have their encounters right there. That's always amazed me. But anyway, they take Calais and not politely order the, shall we call them Calaisians, people who live in Calais? You'll need to move. Can you imagine that? That's so rude to me. I mean, but I'm thinking that's war, because we've got some English folks gonna move in here, and they did. I'm sure plans for the development of Calais would change, but it was just too good for the English at that point to have Calais. And they took it, moved their own people in. The Russians did that with a lot of places. I mean, move in Russians, maybe started having some language lessons and bringing in more and more people. In any event, with all the problems involving the plague, like massive death, yeah, that's a war killer, isn't it? Yeah, forgive the awful pun. In addition to that, there are terrible revolts. Some of us know it from the latter 14th century in terms of England, but we also know in France there were terrible revolts of the peasants, and that's, I don't know if we're concerned about the peasants as much as we are. It makes it difficult to have a war if the peasants aren't going to act like they're supposed to. So all of this, the jacquerie, it was called, just peasants, and they could be rude. I mean, you get them excited, and they were. I call it how euphemistic is that, domestic problems. Yeah, I'd say, yeah. If I were a noble, I would have an extra lock on my door, because people are really irritated. Yeah, again, it's like plague, population goes down. Why am I not doing better? That sort of thing. So same thing will happen in England, as many of you know. A decade later, the French come back, and we talk about humiliation. This is humiliation. Philip VI was dead, and he left as equally inept son as the new king. John II. You don't have to worry about John I. It won't be on the phone. John II, you do have to know though. But you can just call him John the Good. And you're thinking, oh, how nice. He loved people. Well, he loved women. I guess if you consider that to be good, he was very particular in that way, but he was good in the sense of he loved chivalry, anything to do with chivalry. So that's why they called him good. I always find that fascinating. But it's just like, he loved the ladies and the court and drinking more than was good for him, perhaps, and all the rest of it. So all of that, and once again, French, who apparently had not learned anything 10 years before. Then at Poitiers, who will, the English who will be led by Edward III's son. Edward had basically turned over the military aspects to his son, who is known as, of course, the Black Prince. And the Black Prince, I call him aging, or we could say prematurely senile, but basically his liver wasn't in good shape. Yeah, we know about bad liver. Yes, and we don't have to be MDs for that. But Edward probably partied more than was good for him. But the Black Prince was ready and able to lead it. And he too was very much into chivalry. Yeah, so at the Battle of Poitiers, which is not the same as those other sites, because that's down in the area of Poitou, down south a bit, where these two sets of warriors came together. And again, the French were humiliated. And again, I don't think you could see, maybe you can't see the whole, there's some horses here and there, I believe you can tell. And it was not a good day for equestrians, let's just put it that way. So the story goes in the chronicles that it was very difficult for the Black Prince. Because basically, you know what the Black Prince had to do? He had to bring in a king. He said, gosh, I wonder how I would do this. And, you know, you want to write Abby or Anne or one of them, Anne Landers, and say, dear Abby, I need to, you know, bring in a king, and I'm afraid about what are the etiquette, cause I'm just a prince and he's a king. And seriously, they make a big deal about how this went over. And John, he's not known for John the Good for nothing. He was like, oh, you're so great. Oh, you are too. Oh, shucks, not like you though. I mean, they laid it on each other. And apparently, according to the Chronicle, he actually said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a banquet in your honor. He said, oh, shoot, you don't have to do that. We know we're glad to do it. We just have, I mean, it's, you say, really? Why didn't he just lock them up? You know, no, that would be so rude. Bad manners. So you're tomorrow, you know, with a hangover. Yeah. Then we're going to bring you in. But tonight, here to the warriors and vassalage and all the great fealty and homage that make it work. And so they toasted the Black Prince and King John the Good, and then off we go across the channel, because now, of course, John the Good is going to be, dare I say it, a prisoner of the English. And they'll check him into the tower. I guess they had suites for, wouldn't you think? I mean, the tower was a correctional institution in many respects, but I think part of it had to be a place for special guests. No, I'm just thinking. I mean, you wouldn't want to put a king in the economy suite. And thinking, yeah, it would have been this in the YMCA. I mean, this has got to be kind of nice if you got the king. So, and it wasn't just John, it was other nobles who had been captured. Quite an interesting story. And of course, here we go. I love they put him in the fleur de lis, so he's all done up in case we can't figure out what he is. Obviously, he is that Frenchman. And of course, like I say, all this occurs after battle and the Tower of London, and there is a price on the king's head, the French king's head, because always when you capture someone like that, there's a reason. And of course, the filth of lucre is involved, as we always know. And this is what I love. The French, you know how we love, well, are we going to have Tiger Tuesday soon? And this is very important because they have John every day of the week because they're fundraising to get him out of Hawk. I mean, and then you think, do we really need to do that? Because he is a lame brain, but he is the king, a while. Well, so they do, I think they make one payment because the English said, okay, you can have him after you make your first payment. And so they can't really come up with the second, and he goes back. John the Good, and don't you forget it. That's super good. Because if you don't make your payment, it's not, yeah, I'm back in Paris and you can't get it. No, he realized, he actually said, I need to be in the tower because my people didn't raise the money. You know, that failed. That special fund drive. I just knew they were going to come up with it. But that's the truth. And he went back and he died there. And I just like to think, I don't think he just stayed in the tower doing nothing. I think he played chess, maybe had some games, and I think he had some companionship. Yeah. So, yeah, all of that was going on, and then he died. And that was okay with the French because he had been ratemyking.com getting a 1 star. One. That's not good. That is just poor as can be. So his son, Charles V, Regent Charles, and then the first successful Valois, shall we say, now became king. So John the Good is a disaster like his father, Philip VI. And this is significant because in the case of both England and France, it's always to regard the internal issues of England and France, both when we consider why the war is going as it is. And it doesn't necessarily mean it will end up that way. Now, let's note this. The Treaty of Bretigny, 1360, and the idea is that all of the lands you see those lands in pink, are lands that the English were holding at that particular point, which would be late in the reign of King Edward III. And you say, why those? Well, I suppose it has to do with actually where the Black Prince had his headquarters down in Bordeaux. And so the French are getting, shall we say, concerned in the time of Charles V by now. So they're saying, okay, let's just get this over with. You can just keep what you got, and let's just call it an end. So that's the treaty. But even when they made that agreement, or they didn't make the agreement, because bad health hit both sides. Because the French basically wanted the English to renounce the title King of France. And the English hemmed and hawed, and the Black Prince's health was failing. And his father was not well either. But Edward III and the Black Prince. So they get 1376, 1377. And many of you Shakespeareans will remember Richard II. Another story next year. All of this is to say the Treaty of Bretigny never took place. Well, it took place, but it never went into effect. Because if you ask me, and you go to some history conference and somebody say, do you really believe in the Treaty of Bretigny? Do you think they would really have respected that treaty? Probably not. But it seemed like a good idea, renounce that title. They're just trying to get the English to say we were just teasing. We don't really think we're the kings of France. And you be kings of France, and we just want to love you very, very much. Sort of like, I go back to the 120th celebration of the Entente. Gosh, and just say, oh, you English are just the best. Yeah. I know. I too am finding tad of hypocrisy. So all of that would have been very nice. Now, after that, Richard II, of course, had no intention. He's just a little fella. There had no intention of going on with the war in that particular time. So we don't have to worry about that. And that will be, as far as that family goes, the end of the line. Because Richard II has no heirs, right? So we have another line.
A lot of uncles.
Yes, lots of uncles who wanted to help. Yeah, that's what uncles are for. Just they love little Richard. Yeah, right. So all of this lets us go back now to, shall we say, the person who decided to bring it all back or revive the war. And so we're sort of like in part two, because during those years, they had so many problems at home. I think, I just don't think Richard II or Henry IV, for that matter, really wanted to delve back into this French business. But the fellow you see here, and I'm not sure that was because you would think, I guess that was all the rage. If you were a great king and warrior, you put that soup bowl on and then have them cut. But there he was, and he was definitely, I was saying to some of you about Kenneth Branagh in 1989, and then, of course, who could forget Olivier in 1944? How many people have played that in the Shakespearean version? So whatever you think of him, and there is pro and con. Even though, what was that term? The Band of Brothers.
The Band of Brothers.
Yes, and all of that. A lot of that has to do, of course, with Shakespeare's efforts to glorify the predecessors of the Tudors. In any event, he had many characteristics that perhaps some of us today would not consider to be attractive. Trying to be very careful here. He was not exactly tolerant of those who differed from him, including his own father. He was not this famous Lancastrian. In fact, there are only three. And out of the first one, and then Henry V's son, not good at all. So you got one Lancastrian. So yeah, I mean, Henry VI, he meant well. But there we go. And we always have that sense, I guess this would be typical of people in that period, especially when you think you're right. And it's not just I'm right, but God and me are right. We're right together, dynamic duo. And that's definitely our Henry V. The idea that when he became King of England after Henry IV's, shall we say, untimely demise, Henry V wanted France, and he wanted it badly. It had been a long time since the English had attacked France. And as he did this, you know what he's going to do. Remember Tiger Tuesday? Get that money. Yes, we're going to have to hit them up. Can you imagine? God, your phone would just ring, all of that, and your internet. Could you give just, I know we'll hurt a bit. God, all the public radio station. I've gotten hit a lot lately. I'm just telling you. But all of this is to say he was hitting, and it's not the first time, because you go to the monasteries and then you go, I love you so much, Bishop. You know what I did to some Lollards the other day? Yeah, exactly. And the bishop go, yes, sir, I know. You really did persecute them. We thank you a lot for that. Would you bring me a checkbook in here? Yeah, no, we can give you an extra contribution. And you think, I can't prove any of this, but the speculation is that he would do things of this sort because, you know, if you want to have a good war, you got to fundraise. You got to have lots of money to conduct it. And he was lucky because, wouldn't you know it, the French had lots of problems. So that's good for Henry. Now, again, who really knows how he looked? But that seems a little Oliver Cromwell-ish to me with that particular do. But that's the illustration. And these Lancastrians come and go, Jimmy.
I was just gonna say, all his portraits are in profile because the other side of his face had a giant scar from when he got shot in the face with an arrow.
He got it as a young man.
Yeah, I got shot right here.
Well, yeah, that's very
Some-
unattractive.
Some
Yeah.
genius surgeon figured out a way to get it out without killing him. They put like
Wow.
little sticks.
It was a miracle.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because God wanted him to be king. So he must have been working with the surgeons. Yeah. Imagine medieval medicine. Yeah, that would, yeah, scary, right, Karen? Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that. But that's interesting. I mean, to think, because I can't imagine Sir Laurence Olivier or,
Yeah, no.
Yeah. 'cause that would be most unattractive. Yeah. So anyway, we got that. And this is the poor soul he left to go against him. Charles VI, and you go into medical history. Now, this was Charles V's son, Charles V, Charles VI. You say, really? Why would they keep getting that name? I don't know, but I guess if you had to do fill in the blanks on a medieval test, maybe you could guess your way out of that and say probably another Charles or maybe a Louis in there or something. But all of this is to say Charles VI ruled for a long time. It always seems like the worst they last physically because it was not mentally. He had a variety of problems, and I'm not sure if those mental problems that will become worse and worse as the years go on mean necessarily that that was his only problem. In other words, I'm not so sure that he would have been a successful king because, like many an English king, he's surrounded by people who say they're very concerned about him. Remember how you thought the Lancastrians and those uncles? And you say, gosh, Dickie, Uncle John gone. We love you, worry about you. We want you to be happy because I know you're sad that your daddy is gone. And, and then you say, are you sure? Or are you just mad and power hungry? I'm thinking we appreciate the fact that that was going on in this particular period. And so uncles of this king were in fact fighting for control of him. Think of that wonderful wine, Burgundy, the Duke of Burgundy and the Duke of Orleans. And again, you think, but we're all for France. Go Big F. I don't know about that. I think, again, I consider it just a noble power struggle. And Charles VI, with his own issues, is caught essentially in the middle. And again, it's interesting, isn't it, that it's kind of like a parallel with the English. That is, Richard II surrounded by uncles who have their own concerns, shall we say. So government control. So there's our poor Charles. And I think he was younger at that point. So he was still able to exercise some control. All of that leads us to October of 1415. In case we are wondering, again, thinking about Shakespeare and the famous play, the idea of Henry V and his claims to be King of France, and claims that he believed, or at least that he said, were divinely inspired. God wants me to have this. Because back in my ancestry, even though I might add his father was a usurper, but we'll let that go. Let that go. That was just fair and balanced. Yeah, just want to note that. The idea is that he was claiming Normandy, of course. And that's where this famous encounter came about, because look up there, see how it's between, I always find that very ironic, between Calais and Crécy. They were somewhat similar, and being the great battle that it was, brought about very surprising to some result. I say that if you read the Chronicles, which may be somewhat biased. Yes. But that's like, back in the Greek times when they would talk about the Athenians beating up on the Persians and those Persians, kick them, and those big bad Greeks, and that it sometimes you can be a little skeptical by modern day standards, but we'll let that go. We don't want them. So all of that, just 500 English casualties, and the French just dying like flies. They just going down. And you know why? 3 letters, 1 syllable, starts with G. God. Yes, this is all divine result. But that was 1415. And it's interesting to me that this was just the beginning. It's like sometimes you think, oh, well, we got Agincourt. I mean, we're in charge now. No, you're not. No, you're not. 1417 would be the completion. And why Normandy? Well, Normandy's ours. I mean, this is where we're from, our people. Really? I mean, yeah, the Department of Lancastrian mythology. Yeah, I mean, it's like, don't you sometimes think about if they'd had media back then and you worked this up into your true claim, and I don't know, what he thought about the Valois. It wasn't good. So this area that you see there, love the colors, would show you what basically Henry had conquered. I always find that kind of interesting because there isn't much in the South, is there? So they haven't expanded that. And you say, but Brittany, yeah, well, that was a long time ago. That was 1360. And you know what happened after the Black Prince's death? Those French come back in and say, we're big, we're better, we're taking it. Yeah. So this is all down south. Granted, a very pretty area down there. At least I think so. There's Navarre and Aragon. See, well, right down there. And all of that, see the green. And then you see all of that is controlled somewhat. You always say controlled. I wonder what kind of control you have. But that area was under military rule of Henry's son. And with the French very, very concerned with their problems. I thought it was interesting when you go over there and look at all the way over the east and you see that yellow. There's our mustard people down there, Dijon. Yeah, yeah. Nothing wrong with French if you want to hang out with the commoners, but Dijon is there for you others. All of this is to say that Burgundy is one of these uncles, and he will be allied with the English. You say, well, that doesn't seem right. I don't think they're worried about what's right. I think, and you say, how does he sleep at night? I think he does a very good job. I mean, they are just not in the sense of like, but that would not be true. It wouldn't be fair. We're not trying to be Rotarians here. We understand that these are power politics, and he thinks that through this, he will gain some advantage, these Dukes of Burgundy. So, what will happen at this point is that Henry, after taking Normandy, and again, this painting, I think, is a bit, I don't think he's going to start dating her, sending a want ad, looking for a French princess. I think basically this will probably be arranged by French and English promoters. Because, frankly, don't you figure Henry V is anxious to become king, but Charles VI wants to put him off, or at least the people who are controlling Charles VI do. So they say, how would you like it if the king, can you believe this? Or rather, the queen says, the heir to the throne was a little boo-boo. Yeah. You know, I know, postman, milkman, I don't know. Somebody stopped by. He's not really the king's son. Oh, shucks. Mon Dieu, you know, it's like we're really disappointed. And you could marry the king's daughter. And the king is not well. His medical reports, ratemyhill.com, -1. He's going down every day. The charts don't look good. So instead of this law, I'm such an old cynic. I'm terrible, but because I have the idea of, you know, it's like Romeo and Juliet. Oh, my darling, I've dreamt of you. All the way in merry old England, I've dreamt of you, my French beauty. I hate to pull the plug on that, but I'm just thinking this was arranged. And it was arranged, of course, so that King Charles VI could keep his throne and forestall the prospects of Henry. And you say, but what happens with little boo-boo, formerly known as the Dauphin, formerly known as the heir to the French throne? Well, we say a fond au revoir. Yeah, he'll move. I mean, he'll have an expense account. Yeah. I mean, you think that's the least you can do. But if Hallmark is expecting a purchase on Mother's Day and Father's Day, would you not think that kid must have had some serious issues? I mean, think about that, you know. But he did have a nice palace. So he will become the future Charles VII, but at this point, he is disinherited. So the idea is that the new heir to the throne is going to be the English Henry V, who God wanted to be king. And you say, but I thought he would be king right now, ASP. Well, it didn't work out that way, did it? So you're saying, yeah, but I read the report from the FMA, the French Medical Association, and it doesn't look good. I mean, Charles VI is going downhill. Yeah, looks awful. So, and Henry could not be more excited, or Romeo, whoever he is up there. Yeah, but there's real irony coming your way. God, think about it. And it's the ugly dysentery. Yes, that will get our Henry V. This famous ruler this Shakespearean hero, one of the great roles. Has there been anybody since Kenneth Branagh who's done that role? Thinking you would, I always know, you know these things. I mean, it's like incredible, and what an awful way to go. But he went. But by that point, he did have a child by Charles VI's daughter. Boy, that's 1415 to 1422. I mean, Henry V. So that will leave little Henry, aka Henry VI, as baby king, I guess you would say. And this again, this particular picture of the coronation of Henry VI, again, I think it's in somebody's imagination, but that's what he claimed. And it's like, I don't know who is around there at the coronation of Henry's going like, wow, King of England, King of France. This is a great day. Can you imagine if they had Kodak? That would have been a Kodak. Didn't they used to call it Kodak moment? Yeah. Yeah, that would have been a big Kodak moment, because you say, gee, it's all coming together. This is what we had hoped for. Well, I would wait and see how that works out for you. He hit Charles VI, grandpa, who was totally gone mentally by this point. And I assume it was some form of dementia, surely. He died shortly thereafter. So, ergo, we have this little fella becoming king. Not that he was going to rule. There would be, shall we say, Carolyn, I'm sure you know, uncles. And we love you very much, Uncle Tommy. There would be an uncle in England, an uncle in France. Oh, you're so cute, little Henry. I mean, it's like sad in a way, but that's the way it was going to be. And this is what he will become. Again, we never know about how these people really look, but we do know he was very pious. We know he loved Cambridge University very much, King's College, Cambridge. And I always, when you go by there, always think about Henry VI, because mostly he gets a bad press. So I want you to think about Cambridge and how much we love Cambridge. So all of this, he loved the church. And it's not surprising, really, because of the traditions that go way back to his father. And I never met a Lollard I liked. Let's put it that way, yeah. And so always giving, I see a monastery. I want to find a collection plate. I want to give. All of that, and at the same time, inheriting his grandfather's mental illness. That's what people say. Now, you want to stir up people at a history conference, get on that, if it was inherited or whether it was a different kind of disease, but whatever it was, he had symptoms that seemed like his grandfather. In any event, he was not actually ruling for a very long time. And the French regent did very well, actually, in terms of the war and all of that. The English, I'm sorry to say, somewhat corrupt. Yep. That happens. But all of this means that this particular struggle for power and control over Henry, not so much his mother, yeah, she got back to dating. She dealt with her pain and, I mean, she was just late teens or something. So she was out, seeking companionship. So there was no problem with, Catherine. All of this leads us to, well, I guess, would you call her the most famous woman in medieval history? Your book has a lot to say about her. And I think we all wonder how much do we really know is true or how much is developed. But I do know this. The Pope and the French government in the 1920s wanted to have a relationship, and she helped fix them up by making her Saint Joan, because sometimes we think, why is she a saint? God may, but it was very good for the Catholic Church in France. In any event, she had a very interesting role to play. She was, without trying to be unkind, a peasant. She was from Eastern France. She heard voices. And whether you want to call her, I don't, but if you want to call her a French nationalist, somehow, would you just say she was anti-English? Maybe that would go Anglophobe. As much as anything else. And what that's got to do with sanctity and all of that, I do not know. But again, I take you to the 1920s and the inner cabal of the Vatican at that time and how they're dealing with the Third Republic. Another lecture, another talk. I'm going to let that go. All of this is to say that I just love this picture, particularly at Rouen, not Paris, because that's under English control. So we go here and see that light? That light's coming in. You say, divine light? Indeed. And why is it coming in? Because God is very pro-French. Yeah, I didn't think you took sides. Well, the painter apparently disagrees with you. And meanwhile, of course, this Joan of Arc with the banner and the issues of the clothing and her motivation and how she had such influence over Charles. I mean, I read all this stuff when I was a child. I've always found it fascinating to think of how she got in and how he was convinced, because like I told you, he must have had issues himself. I mean, if your mother said that about you, wouldn't you? I mean, think about, you were a mistake. I mean, and Isabella of Bavaria, trivia.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Tough one.
but hey, for you, you may want to use this in some trivia if you're asked to make it up in some sort of game. All of this is to say that she was eventually captured by French allies of the English, and the English took her, for a price, and a church court there would try her and find her guilty of heresy. She at first confessed, and then she renounced her confession. And if you remember, that's a very, very bad thing to do by Inquisition rules. She should have just kept her mouth shut. But you come out of the cell and you say, you know, I was just teasing. I'm not really here to. God was talking to me and all of that. And that was the end of that, 1431. But what's always gotten me about that is that after all she did for the French king, he said, gosh, you're a mess. I'm so sorry. I wish you all the best. How do they say that? Bon chance? Yeah. But he had no further use for him, thinking. I mean, he's considered a great king of France. But I don't think they worry too much about your morals or your loyalty to those, because all of this is to say that with that coronation, then a very important step was made. And by that period, the English are, shall we say, having great problems of their own, both in France and England. What happens is that Henry VI went to church a lot, and he got older, and they noticed that things weren't going well for him. He was presumably, now I can't promise this, but I suspect strongly he was living the life of a celibate. I mean, not as a monk so much as living the life of a monk without being one. Whatever the case, the government decided he needed to be married. Not that they worried about his love life. I think they were worried about his having an heir, because there were people around, uncles and such, who were thinking, we want to help you, Hank. You need help. And no doubt he did. And this is supposed to be the very young Margaret of Anjou, who came from a side French family. Not direct line, but close enough. She was a teenager. It's amazing. We just think about people like that in today's world. Maybe it's we just somehow let people be young longer somehow. But she was ready, and she was a fighter. She married him. And I don't think he was well, even at that point when they were first married. In any event, Richard, Duke of York. I think I've heard of him from Shakespeare's Greatest Hits, right? So yes, he says, I love you very much, Henry. I want to help you with your government. People want to help you. Ask yourself, why? But I'm thinking by that point, Richard, Duke of York, had gained control of the government, and he was probably not happy when Margaret showed up, because Margaret, whatever she may have thought about her husband, was in it for power. And there was some series, I think, in which she was a major figure. Because the idea is that were it not for her, Henry VI wouldn't have lasted as long as he did. And somehow she became pregnant. Now you say, I know. It's a miracle, yeah. Because you're thinking, you think Henry VI was in the mood for love? I'm not gonna sing, don't,
No.
I promise, but I'm really wondering about that. Whatever the case, by some hook, she became pregnant. So by the time she had the child, it was very difficult for the Duke of York, as you can imagine. And 1453, Bordeaux falls to the French. And they call that the end of the 100 Years' War. It's not a very dramatic ending. And I'm not sure that the people of Bordeaux were excited about it. Because I'm not like, it's not like they can, thank gosh, those darn English, I really dislike them. No more of their yucky food, all the rest. I'm just thinking they probably didn't like either one of them. But the idea is it was over. Sadly, it doesn't mean that the English don't want to keep trying to get it back, and they will keep Calais until 1558. However, there are other adventures. Yes. Oh, North America, colonization. Let's go west when
Use
we
that
think
sea
we're going
power.
east. Yep. And for the French, it means a growth in the power of their king and nobles. And do we have France yet? Sort of, but not really. Yeah, we got a long way to go in there. But that's a very, very long process. But it will be non-English for sure. They played a great role. And we remember that when we celebrate the 120th anniversary of the Entente. I'm not over that yet. I'm still fighting for self-control. But yeah, but we will be ready for Chaucer and the great one, Dante,
Dante, big
next
time.
week. Okay, see you then. Thank y'all.